we have our second presenter, Beatrice Beccari from University of Ferrara in Italy, and the presentation is named Contra Naturam, a short study into Leopardi and Schopenhauer's meditation. Beatrice is a PhD student in philosophy, and she graduated on thesis both on Schopenhauer conception of time and Schopenhauer's influence on the early Wittgenstein. And now she continues research in the direction, as I understand, in the direction of Wittgenstein and with connection to Schopenhauer. And for this presentation, as I suppose as an Italian, she is combining Schopenhauer with my favorite Leopardi, Giacomo Leopardi. So I'm very curious about your perspective. So the floor is yours. Yeah, basically 20 minutes and then discussion.
Okay, nice. Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you here, despite virtually form, and it's a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here presenting in this conference. Is this the first time for me? And thank you for the organizer. And I really find this initiative, society included, very quite remarkable. So congratulations. And okay, so let us begin. I have a presentation. So now I'm going to, okay, share. Are you seeing it right now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, right. Okay, nice. Okay, so let us begin this brief journey through boredom as Leopardi and Schopenhauer depicted it. And I would like to start talking about the title I chose. So Contra Naturam in Latin, that is against nature. Okay, so the choice of Latin is linked to the fact that Leopardi was an extraordinary expert of ancient Greek and Latin. And in fact, Leopardi is, among other things, known as an excellent philologist and translator. So the title is a way of recalling this aspect that will be left aside here. And of course, the choice of this expression concerns the meaning and the opposition to nature, which Leopardi uses to characterize boredom. This sort of definition is linked to the passage I have quoted in this slide, in which boredom, a specific condition of the soul that opens up to the vanity of existence, is the most reasonable, indeed the only reasonable for the human being, because it is the most contrary to nature. In my eyes, this passage is significant because it openly expresses the paradoxicality inherent in boredom, which from a philosophical point of view, I find interesting to emphasize, considering boredom as a part of life, recognizing it and assigning it a philosophical, experiential, cognitive, and emotional dignity. It helps the two authors to express the human existential condition in deep and new tones. Boredom is a stage in the search for the meaning of living, and it helps to understand both the limits of the enterprise and its importance, especially if we understand the pitfalls of the exercise of reasoning and the cult of rationality. Embracing boredom helps to represent the weight that awareness of one's own life, of being a thinking animal, of the role and relationship with nature and other beings can have for us. In short, the reflection and consideration of boredom allows Leopardi and Schopenhauer to open the doors to a new sensitivity on life, courageous and disenchanted, which rearranges the terms of anthropocentrism and rationalism, which opens to existentialism and philosophical anthropology, and finally, a new configuration of the long-standing relationship between human and nature and culture. This is an analysis that never loses its vigor and always remains relevant. And if approached with attention, it also helps to overcome the dismissive label that identifies it as pessimistic. Beyond the echoes and assonances, this comparison I propose here is based on historical elements that I will briefly mention. It is not simply a matter of exploring two contemporary authors who said something on the same subject with similar points of view. Although they never interacted directly, Schopenhauer read Leopardi and was particularly impressed by him. He bought his complete works in Italian, a volume in which there are underlinings and marks, so this is quite indicative of a passionate and careful reading. And he discussed him, Leopardi, in letters with his acquaintances and fellow disciples. And above all, he cut out a commentary in the third edition of The Word as Will and Representation, which I quote here. He defines Leopardi as completely filled and penetrated by the feeling of the pain of existence, and therefore Leopardi was able, through his art, poetry, and prose, to express it in various facets, giving pleasure and stimulating the reader, Schopenhauer included, of course. This encounter came late, when Schopenhauer still had a couple of years left to live, but he was in time to see the first contribution published in Italy, comparing him with Leopardi, and thus promoting his philosophy, Schopenhauer's philosophy, in Italy. And I'm referring to Schopenhauer and Leopardi, a dialogue by De Sanctis. Conversely, Leopardi never knew Schopenhauer. This is partly because Leopardi was not educated in German philosophy, and he also knew little of the language. But this does not exclude the possibility that even though he did not know Kant, and this is the main aspect in some way distances the two thinkers the most, the two may have met in reworking certain French philosophers. And this is the intriguing aspect on which I'm concentrating my research efforts. And in any case, if Leopardi had also known German philosophy inside out, The Word as Will and Representation only came to fame after Leopardi's death, even though it was published in 1819. This means that Schopenhauer was unknown during Leopardi's lifetime, even more so in Italy. I give you another clarification before starting. In this short path on boredom I present, as far as Leopardi is concerned, I have mainly considered the Zibaldone, which is a collection of thoughts and reflection composed between 1817 and 1832. It has about 4,500 pages, and each fragment was numbered and dated by the author. So Leopardi did a lot of work organizing the material, but he always considered writing as a private diary, not intended for public, even though many themes flowed from it into his published workings. The first posthumous edition came out around 1898. Thus, Schopenhauer evidently did not know Leopardi as the author of the Zibaldone. The recent Cacciapuoti's philological analysis, following the internal paths created by Leopardi himself, basically they are cards with lists of numbers of the fragments. And this philological reading has underlined Leopardi's interest in philosophical speculation, so much so that he set up internal paths within the text that give life to treatises on philosophy, namely psychology, ethics, anthropology, and aesthetics. In short, I here consider Leopardi as a philosopher, not a poet, writer, or philologist. So even if these are all parts of the same man, of course, so they are coexistent and inseparable in a way. And so I follow also Leopardi's path on boredom, okay, in this Zibaldone. With regard to Schopenhauer, very briefly, I have included quotation from The Word as Will and Representation using the bilingual Italian-German edition. So like Leopardi's quote, I translated the quotation you find in this slide in English. So let's start, because I have divided my presentation into 5 points, into 5 parts, brief parts, where I identified and summarized the main facets of boredom. The first one concerned the boredom experience personally, from which later the philosophical reflection arose. This movement is quite visible in Leopardi, since the Zibaldone is above all a personal diary, as I said. Boredom is one of the first states of mind to appear here, And Leopardi experiences a heavy depressive crisis around 1819. So boredom is immediately combined with melancholy, the pain of living, the burden of existing. And Leopardi speaks of the discouragement of living, of a total boredom, and he often uses personal pronouns and adjectives that refer to the dramatic first-person experience, from which wider-ranging reflection come out, such as here, you see, he writes on comforting and weeping over the sadness of the human condition in general, so humankind in general, feeling this pain that is common to all. Schopenhauer also faced similar periods of despondency, not only following his father's suicide. The biographies speak of this, and there are signs of it in the more private observation in his travel and work notebooks, or in his letters, especially his useful materials. But here I limit myself simply to quote the well-known statement in his curriculum vitae on the reason of his choice to devote himself to philosophy. He states, because life is unpleasant, it is worth reflecting on it. And while filtering his personal experience through philosophical abstraction, a cornerstone of his approach and conception of philosophy is that of adhering to worldly experiences before elaborating thoughts. It would go against his own principle to claim that Schopenhauer spent a serene and happy existence, and then he delighted in talking about the opposite in his philosophy. Let's go on. And here we see another aspect. And this is almost exclusively related to Leopardi's analysis of boredom. And it is the ambiguity between boredom as a total absence of feeling, hence flat indifference, and boredom as passion, so a feeling of emptiness and nothingness, which are two elements closely related to boredom in Leopardi's remarks. I have quoted here some of these remarks. And for Leopardi, being bored is the equivalent of being in the middle of nowhere and feeling nothing. And it also involves feeling nothingness, not just of himself. And it is a sort of suffocation. This is another way to describe this state. And above all, he says that this nothingness is solid. It's something concrete, almost physical. Still, boredom is a sterile passion, he writes. However, Leopardi notes that there is a less exhausting boredom, slightly more vital and therefore more similar to a commonly understood passion. It does not open up to the philosophical contemplative abyss of the nothingness, but it is a milder momentary boredom, one that still gives the possibility of hope or desire for satisfaction and happiness. And this is why Leopardi identifies it as the typical boredom of the young people, of those who still have vitality, but for some circumstances experience a moment of indifference and apathy. Let us now enter in the core of the matter, that is the paradox inherent in boredom. Boredom makes us perceive and know the emptiness, the nothingness, the vanity of life, but this happens because life is fully felt, without pleasure and without pain. It is revealed and made perceptible as it is. So let us begin by seeing what is living for these two authors. It emerges in the negative from the experience of boredom. If boredom is a moment of happiness, what is emptiness, what is fullness? A life that is not bored. Here we see Leopardi saying irremediably, invariably, boredom fills every void left by living, which is a continuous succession of pleasure and displeasure. The moment the two are lacking, there is boredom, which is therefore the absence of pleasure and displeasure. Schopenhauer also maintains something very similar. Living is a desiring, an aspiring, a movement towards the attainment of something from a lack. And lack means displeasure and dissatisfaction. On the contrary, attainment means pleasure and satisfaction. When this succession slows down, boredom emerges and it stiffens life, blocks its unnoticed flow, and makes life present to the bored person. The nothingness, The nothingness associated with boredom for Leopardi corresponds to not living, not doing, and ultimately death. And the thing humans are most incapable of is precisely this: not doing, not acting. Since boredom consists in this unnatural stasis, it is something to which humans are incapable of becoming accustomed. And therefore, it does not matter if a person is often bored. The state will always be indigestible and unbearable whenever it arises, because boredom is contrary to living, contrary to nature. Yet, this contradiction in humans is evident in the rift between nature and culture that has been created within humans' biological ability to exercise reason as a tool for survival. Much of Schopenhauer's philosophy talks exactly about this issue. He uses the concept of the will to live to define the metaphysical principle that drives the whole of nature, including humans, in which, however, this sort of short circuit occurs. The blind will comes to recognize itself through reason, which is the highest manifestation of this will in nature, this force of nature. When the unquenchable flow of wanting and inspiring in which life consists is interrupted, a void opens up. And here boredom appears and life presents itself for what it is. One has the time to understand that one exists. So this is the moment when this existence becomes a burden, because it is not exercised according to nature. Life flows and flows in myriad of occupations, from the most necessary ones to the most frivolous one, but at least these help to distract us from life in itself. The remedy, then, is to try to feel life less, so to live it less intensely, and thus also to avoid boredom. Then life itself does not consist of something positive. It is pain and lack that pushes towards an overcoming that will be insufficient in a continuous cycle. But already this continuity would guarantee a life devoid of the awareness of its vanity. Therefore, strictly speaking, and philosophically speaking, theoretically speaking, it would be almost preferable not to live. Schopenhauer totally agrees with this. And there is a need to chase away the boredom that becomes insistent, especially when there is no longer any need to fight for existence and to survive somewhat. And the naturalness of living has been now sublimated into a civilized way of life, and we are talking about early 19th century. The bourgeoisie, for Schopenhauer, and similarly to Leopardi, for Leopardi as well, is the emblem of the affliction of boredom for mankind, so much so that in order to get rid of it, one seeks sociality. Although both Leopardi and Schopenhauer agree that humans are not social by nature. Hence, amusements, entertainments, forced sociability are all expedients and remedies against boredom. We see another aspect, and here we have boredom as a way of seeing things, as if one were showing the film negative of photograph. So it is a view of the world, to see the world, is a way to see the world. And for Leopardi is the third of three ways. After that of the genius, that is the artist, and the ordinary human being. The third way emerges from boredom and is that of the philosophers, who face, live, and rationalize the experience of the emptiness of human concerns, desires, hopes, and illusions, therefore of living in general. Leopardi knew the first way of poetry, but also the third one, as we are seeing him as a philosopher. Schopenhauer says something very similar about this distinction in dealing with the different views of the world and the types of representation distinguishable between science, philosophy, and art. I here underline the passages in which Schopenhauer analyzes the need for metaphysics that is peculiar to the human being as an animal endowed with reason. If life were not painful and destined to an end, there would be no questions such as why the world exists and is made as it is, and not otherwise, why do we die, and so on. However, following these questions along the path of his philosophy leads to paradox. The realization of pain, boredom, evil, vanity leads towards the negation of the will if one approaches the question from a moral perspective, but also leads towards an nihilistic conclusion if one remains in the epistemological transcendental perspective. Nature with reason turns against itself. The human being annihilates itself by using the tool that life has given him to survive. And yet, if we represent through words and concept this nothingness, we are somehow living, and this nothingness, it's not absolute, but relative to our experience of life as it is through and thanks to reason. So Leopardi was also aware of it as well. To conclude, I just want to show you that nevertheless, Leopardi and Schopenhauer reveal a heroic side to the experience of boredom, pain and vanity of life. And it is a sort of reaction and vindication of his own status as thinkers. So all in all, it is only an individual with a noble soul, great sensitivity and reasoning who manages to process this condition of the spirit by finding and then bearing the burden of truth as well as existence, a condition that is therefore very reasonable but contrary to nature and to living, which few managed without going mad, says Leopardi. But those few are able to leave an indelible mark on the history of thought, just as Leopardi and Schopenhauer were able to do, embracing boredom and the nothingness that comes with it. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Technical question. Did you hear my hands?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay, because
I could not.
Perfect work not to show that that you are aware of this. Okay, so it was perfect.
Okay. Should I interrupt the screen sharing, or should I leave my presentation?
I don't know. Do we have questions? Maybe you need to show us some slides to answer some questions.
Anyway, I'm seeing you, so I went back to the meeting, even if I leave my presentation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe I start if there are no other questions, because your presentation was named Contra Naturam, against the nature. So why boredom, according to Leopardi, is against the nature? If you can summarize this for us.
Yeah, sure. It is against nature because it comes from a state of total inaction, and this is something that is quite opposite to the nature of living as human, as animal, as any animal. Human beings are there to act, to do something, and doing something means, of course, for us also just thinking, elaborating a philosophy, for instance, but in a more basic understanding of this making something, doing, acting. We can go back to the biological, setting in which we find ourselves as rational animals. So first thing, biologically speaking, we do is try to survive. So we act in order to survive. So we look for food. We try to reproduce ourselves in order to make our species to survive. But in a moment where when human beings are sure to exist, to survive. So in this civilized moment where Leopardi and also Schopenhauer find themselves, humans had to overcome this boredom because they don't recognize anymore, because of their civilization, that their needs in those moments, in this actual situation, we are talking of 19th century, but of course we are maybe transfer this image to our times, where we don't recognize that our needs are not anymore the biological needs. So they are not so necessary from a natural point of view. Okay, so they are quite artificial. needs. So this create this sort of paradox, because human being now in this circumstance understand that there is this alignment of the biological side of his or her living and civilized living. So it is against nature, because we are completely in this civilized world where maybe we lack of something. And Leopardi especially talks about the distinction of sort not a state of nature, but a way of living more close to nature, so accordingly to nature. And this is a way of living that we find in children, because they can imagine, so they can find some help in living. They don't ask themselves why we are here, basically. Okay, so they don't develop the reasoning as special people do, because we saw that we have noble spirits that can understand this vanity, this nothingness. And also the ancients, so Greek and Latin people could embrace more the nature side of existence. So that's why he's very interested in ancient culture, so Greek and Latin, for instance, but not just them, also Americans, native, for instance. So yes, it's a very complex thing, because when you're talking about civilization, you find another path where you can find many and many observations from by Leopardi. But of course, it is everything is inherent in Leopardi. That's the fact that Zibaldone is non-systematic as a book, but also a very coherent in seeing nature, life, existence, and so on.
Mm-hmm. So the closer you are to animal, the less you are able to be bored. Yeah.
Yes.
Because noble spirits that can understand the concepts of nothingness, they can experience boredom. So it's very complicated terminologically. Yeah, because we call boredom and we think of one thing, and Leopardis think about something completely else. Yeah, and for example, Virginia Woolf says that only simple people can experience boredom, because our elite noble spirits experience melancholy. So you see, boredom, what we mean. Maybe we should express, instead of boredom, Lanoia, go to with tedium. I don't know. In English, there are two terms, boredom and tedium. They are somehow connected, but and in Spanish, you have quite different word for boredom, but you have tedio, or
Also in Italian, yes, sure. But this is the very fact of Leopardi. He wants to call noia everything, because he tries to, develop a sort of conception that tries to, understand all these sort of existence condition. And I believe that it is somehow coming from his own experience. So he can't classify maybe his very, terrible or dramatic experience he had in 1919, and he was quite young. So maybe it's a way to connect everything, because he found he believed to be too much sensitive to life. So maybe this is a way to understand his own experience in living, because he didn't have, unfortunately, a very happy existence, if you go to his biography. So
he was wounded for life. Because of some pain, back problems, which influence the organs. And all of this out of boredom, because I suppose he lived in a castle, in some solitude neighborhood, and there were a big library in this castle. So out of boredom, he starts to read, and then start to be fascinated by these volumes. And he was reading all these books through the nights for many hours in very uncomfortable positions, and so on. And because of this, he had this back problem so hard that then he had a problem with heart and lungs and so on. So out of boredom, boredom defines all your life.
Yeah, but also, you know what? It was forced to study. This is another side of the picture, because of course he was a noble. Yeah,
the nights and all the time.
Yeah, so, and his father was very demanding. So somehow he tried to manage these his own interest, because he was interested in what he was doing, but also with a sort of unhappiness because of his family, because he was quite pressed from the father to study, to become a priest, and so on. So he had to manage a big pressure, and he didn't want to leave the house. He left Recanati, where he lived for a long time, only when he was quite, not very young. So he longed for leaving the house and be free. This is another aspect of his biography.
Yeah, pain and sorrow.
Yeah.
Do we have maybe questions about the presentation or something connected to the issue of Leopardi or Schopenhauer? Yes, please, Todd Simmons. You should turn on your microphone.
Okay, thank you. Is there a way in which what you're saying is that it's against nature, but it almost boredom removes us from nature? I kind of think of being against something, you're still in the stream to a degree, but in what you're describing almost removes us from that stream of nature, from that stream of struggle for existence through the rational. What are your thoughts on how that pulls us out of nature, out of that whole flow of the natural, of that struggle for life? Is it the rational mind that pulls us above to another level, rather than being apart, kind of removes us from?
Yes, thank you. First of all, yes, it's a theoretical movement. It's a sort of answer to this condition and this ability to think about this condition. So it's just I believe it's quite an exercise, a theoretical exercise, because it's quite basically it's impossible to be removed completely from nature, because we are animals who are capable of thinking, but of course this is the problem. We see ourselves detached from natural, detached from nature, but at the same time we are completely inside of it. But we arrived to be incapable of doing anything with nature. We are maybe too much, we have detached ourselves in order to understand nature and understand ourselves. So this is another kind of paradox that we see in Leopardi and Schopenhauer. We are using reasoning while we are saying, we are far from nature. We can not go back to it, because this is another aspect. For Leopardi, we cannot go back to those times in which we are in complete harmony with it. So it is a sort of negative progression of the exercise of rationality. So we see this pessimism in this order of things. So there is no philosophy of history in the kind of idealism, for instance. So there is no optimism in perfection, pursue a sort of perfectioning of rationality. But at the same time, we're using rationality in order to reach a sense of this condition in which we are continue using this rationality, which is biologically given to us. So we are naturally rational beings, but at the same time, this pushes us out, not completely outside, of course. This is completely inherent. We have an immanent image of nature and human, but at the same time, in this image, we find ourselves detached. But it is a theoretical, work, and this is a way. It is a different movement from, I believe, the modern evolving of thinking. So in Schopenhauer, you can understand it if you go back to his work on Kant. So there is a more, grounded in the tradition, in the German tradition, response he gives to the Kantian, perfectibility of reasoning and reason beings. In Leopardi is quite, it's more difficult because he does not have this, support from the philosophical point of view, but exactly as Schopenhauer, he goes back to the French tradition of, and I believe there you can find maybe some of you can find trace of this movement against rationalism. So yes, it is coherent in this rationalism, because philosophy, it is a work of of concepts. So yeah, I hope to have answered. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And this is curious because Todd will be speaking about animal boredom. So if Leopardi would know that we deal with animal boredom, he'll probably become anxious in his so
or maybe very interested.
or maybe okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, this reminds me of Nietzsche, who said that people are seeing a herd of sheep and is a bit anxious about bestial life without all these existential problems, but in the same time we want to be more than just beasts. And we cherish our position that we have this rationality, this consciousness of our own being. Yes, so about this animal and human and something in between, which is probably boredom, this element who, according to the most philosophical tradition, would simply distinguish us from animals, is boredom. Like in French tradition, Enlightenment tradition, they also have this idea that boredom is somehow very human. That this is this very human quality that distinguishes us from animals. So this is, I suppose, the common idea in all philosophical reflection over boredom.
Yeah, also because Nietzsche read Schopenhauer, even if then he doesn't like to admit it. But of course, it comes from Schopenhauer. But as I said, Schopenhauer took a lot from the French tradition, exactly as Leopardi did. So there is a lot of French Enlightenment, even if it's a post-Kantian, and this is quite something, that's why I'm trying to work on this point.
Yeah, I suppose that Leopardi is worth it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any question? Last call. Any question to the presentation? Okay. So if not, thank you very much for the interesting introduction into Leopardi and a bit Schopenhauer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is highly important to promote Giacomo Leopardi. This is not well known, and he's marvelous. And I'm very glad that this panel was. We had a representation of both major philosophical traits of thoughts in Boredom studies, so existentialism and pessimism. Yeah, one Heidegger and one Schopenhauer with Leopardi. So these two philosophical tradition was represented. So I feel that despite the fact that we had only 2 presentations, I suppose that our philosophical panel was full.